Hey team, welcome back to another really incredible episode of the Intentional Agribusiness Leader podcast. This is your host, Mark Jewell, and I am joined today by the lovely Jacqueline Langlois. She's coming in from France, which is awesome. I don't think we've had anybody on the show. Yeah, bonjour. I don't think we've had anybody from, well, not that you're from France, but literally you are in France while we do the interview. You live there. We'll get into the whole why over there because you're from Illinois, which is also quite interesting, but you're living in Europe. And so we're gonna dive into all that. We're going to be talking Gen D today, which is interesting. And I'm going to leave that there. And I'm not going to tell you what Gen D is because that's not on the list of things that come up when I look at the generations. So stick around and find out what that is about. But welcome to the show, Jackie. Super cool to have you.
Yeah, thank you. Really excited to be here and to, explore more about where the conversation's going to lead.
Yes, let's do it. You get the same opening question everybody does. What does it mean for you to be intentional?
For me to be intentional, I bring it back to like reactivity. Am I going to be reactive on what's happening around me, or am I going to choose how my surroundings are? And one phrase that comes up that I've talked about, I didn't coin it originally, but I've seen it online. And I've talked about it in my practice, and it's really meant a lot for me, is the thermostat mindset. And so if you think about a thermostat versus a thermometer is reacting to the environment around it. It changes, it gets hot, it gets cold, whereas the thermostat actually sets the tone. So that goes into that reactivity piece. I always try to think for myself to have that thermostat mindset. And I share that with a lot of people who I work with and my clients, just to how do you want to be intentional and how do you want to set the tone and what does that actually look like?
I dig it. I dig it a lot. Reactive versus choosing the situation versus being proactive. Are you the thermostat or are you the thermometer? Only one is in control of how hot or how cold it gets in the room. So I like it. I like it a lot. Okay, so why are you in France?
Yeah, so like you said, I'm an Illinois farm girl. So grew up just 50 miles south of Chicago where my family still farms today. I was actually just back in April to help with planting, but unfortunately it was too cold and too wet for us to get into the field. But yeah, I mean, agriculture's always been a big part of my life. I went to school for agriculture and have a master's of science in production agronomy. And that's where I started my career. So I worked my way up, climbed the corporate ladder, whether it was for Syngenta or Corteva or Monsanto, and then even Bayer Crop Science. And with Bayer, I was actually lucky enough to be chosen to go on an international assignment. And that is what had originally brought me to France. I split my time between France and the Netherlands. I like to pretend I'm Carmen Sandiego, but it has more to do with visas and tax and all of the complications there. But yeah, I've been in Europe for almost 7 years now, and it's been a really great experience. Just not only just from a life perspective and to have that experience, but I've learned a lot about myself and, how I act and how intentional I am when I'm not on my home turf, when I'm not speaking my native language, when I'm interacting with people where English isn't their native language. And it's brought a lot of intelligence back to me. It's been really great.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I love it. And so you now have family ties to Europe. I'm assuming this is part of the reason because that you went over there with Bear, and we're going to get into this, but then Bear makes changes and that's life, but you've stayed. So that's great. So are you married to a Brit? Is that how I understand it?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
So I met my now husband when I first moved to France and we survived lockdown together. So that's a
Yeah.
miracle in and of itself. But yeah, he's a pilot and he's British. So again, we're not really fluent in any other language aside from English, but I will say that American English and British English are vastly different. So that was a learning experience too. And that's where I say I've learned a lot. Like when I talk about the intelligence piece, that cultural intelligence piece really plays into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so let's talk to us about Gen D Consulting. What are you doing with that? And what does that keep you busy with?
Yeah, so with Gen D, I focus in executive leadership development and organizational strategy. And I really focus a lot. So, Gen D actually stands for the digital generation. And if you look at the generations that are in the workforce today, we are all connected digitally. Like you and I right now, different generations connecting online, being able to do this, which is absolutely amazing. And even though we're really connected, sometimes that digital piece can create silos and people get really comfortable with hiding behind screens. And if you look at today, the acceleration of digital transformations that organizations go through, as well as the adoption of artificial intelligence, there's a lot happening across all industries. It's not just
Absolutely.
food and ag, it's global. And so, what Gen D focuses on, if you think about artificial intelligence, you can leverage that to scale systems and operations. But human intelligence is really what is used to scale leadership. And that's going to be the key differentiator with individuals and organizations to really ride this wave of that artificial intelligence and digital transformation.
So, okay, so what I'm hearing from you is AI can scale intelligence, but humans, I'm writing this as we say it, but humans are going to scale the leadership.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. AI can scale operations, but human intelligence is
Hmm.
what will scale leadership.
Yeah, I like it. I like it's a unique angle. Okay, so tell me more about that. So how does that play out in the conversations? Give us an example. Like, how does that play out in a conversation you might be having with a executive from a company that you're working with?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Usually, when I focus on with human intelligence, that piece is I focus on, like I already mentioned, cultural intelligence, generational intelligence, emotional intelligence, positive intelligence, and behavioral intelligence. Those are kind of my wheelhouses. And as an example, a lot of us have certain behaviors that have probably been ingrained in us from an early age, or we had an experience and then we learned this behavior and it's worked for us and up until this certain point in time. And that's great. And a lot of times when I say it worked for us, it makes the person feel safe.
Hmm.
And usually when I bring that up with my clients, they're like, that's exactly why I'm doing it. It's not just I'm comfortable doing it, it's I'm safe. I
Hmm.
doing it. And then a lot of times you see these leaders, like I'll use myself as an example, or I have other clients that have a very strong technical background. When they start climbing that corporate ladder, they're being rewarded for really delivering. They're focusing on that tactical execution. And so they're going through the motions and doing that and getting that positive reinforcement. But when you become more of that senior leader, you have to switch and think more about strategy. You have to focus more about influence, and you have to think a lot about being respected or being liked and which one is more important. So the executives who I work with, they tend to get stuck on this hamster wheel of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And they
Hmm.
feel comfortable, doing something that maybe they did in a more junior role and it's not serving them where they currently are. So I dig into some of those behaviors of why they feel comfortable and why they feel safe doing that. And in looking at other behaviors as tools that they have in their toolbox and why they're not activating on them. And so that's like the tip of the iceberg, because then I shift into like that mindset and that positive possibility mindset and that positive intelligence, because a lot of times our actions are being driven by triggers. And so we have a thought and then we act. And
Hmm.
we expect something to change and it doesn't. And so it's really digging deeper of what is driving that trigger that's causing me to act this way. And is it just for instant gratification, again, because I feel comfortable and safe? Or is it really serving that longer term goal?
Okay. Wow. All right. So there's a lot to unpack there, and we're
Yeah.
we're gonna dive into this. So I think you're right. We actually, and within our work at the Momentum Company, we have a framework we teach called the Story Framework, which shows you how you get stuck in a story, or how some stories serve you, and some stories no longer serve you, and some never really serve you. But it's all based off of a trigger. The trigger produces a thought. The thought produces a feeling. The feeling is what we tend to react to, or act upon, or not take action on. all three of those would get us a result, which is an effect of another trigger, and it creates a whole cycle, right? It just creates a circle of like this, and it becomes your story. So it's very easy, and I'm just trying using my language to try to understand your language here a little bit. So let's just say I'm a person who has come up, and I went to school and I got my ag degree, and then I went maybe I went out and maybe not. I went and got a master's degree, okay, such as yourself and myself, and thinking, okay, this is going to position me for greater leadership down the road. And then the day comes, maybe 5 years in, 10 years into your career, you get that leadership role. So now, like the tactical things that got me noticed, that helped me earn trust with my superiors, okay, those got me to the new story. But now I'm actually living into a new level, a new story. Like I've leveled up in the game. Now I have the leadership title, and I have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people reporting to me. And so what served me to get me noticed up to this point doesn't necessarily serve me anymore at this level. Have I unpacked and understood so far one of the
Yes,
things that you said?
correct.
Right. All right. Well, now what do I do?
Yeah, you hire me. No, I mean, it really takes, again, it takes that self-discovery, because it will kind of feel like it will feel awkward and probably very uncomfortable when you're like, okay, I've been delivering this and now I need to do something new, and from a leadership perspective, and it's kind of moving into the unknown. And I would say that, that is a very humbling experience, but also don't be afraid to suck at something new. And that's where people need to turn into, from that tactical execution and from being doers, into more connectors. And so, how do you connect? How do you connect with your direct reports? How do you connect them with other people that can help you and your team achieve different goals? Like, where are there the gaps? Like, where are the different strengths that the people on the team have, and how can that actually be leveraged? It takes time, and it also takes a lot of vulnerability. And leaders who I work with sometimes think, well, me being vulnerable is a weakness, and if I'm not delivering, I'm not adding value. There's more to adding value than just an output and, like, putting a cog in a wheel or something like that. And that's where I start to focus in more on, like you said, the behavioral piece and the thought piece. And so what's driving those behaviors that you feel safe in, and how do we make that pivot? And just kind of sitting in something, just because it feels uncomfortable doesn't mean it's wrong. And
Hmm.
so it's just getting, it's getting over that hump into that next level of leadership. And the more that you do it, the more comfortable you feel, and the more it's just like working a muscle, and it just becomes second nature. And so it's a way to adapt. And of course, like now we're in such changing times, it definitely helps people to move forward, to pause, think about, long term what they want to do, and then move forward in that way.
So definitely understand as we're climbing that corporate ladder, so to speak, whatever that looks like for me, and get to that new level. I've got a new set of problems to solve, right? And so I have to, even though it is going to be uncomfortable. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. I was just listening to two different podcasts, or one podcast, and reading one book just in the last 12 hours. Really realizing that once you get to the new level, and we think that maybe it's going to be easier, or you're going to be done, or it's time to celebrate. Like, it's not. It's just time to go do more work.
Yeah.
And that's literally the Lord's design. Retirement is a man-made construct that's not really real. It's not, there's just more work to be done. And so the way that we have structured corporate America to sort of have this like idea that you get to another level and then it's over, or it's better, or it's easier. No, it's not really. Like, you actually, the name of the game is always going to be problem solving. Congratulations, welcome to adulting, right?
Yeah.
And
I think too, like how you were talking about, we've talked a little bit about generations, that's
Mhm.
something that, like, I remember, you climb the corporate ladder and you're rewarded for your time and tenure at an organization. And it always looked like, oh, they got to the top and it was easy and they were just delegating down. And that, it might have been that way. I don't know, maybe in the 90s or so, but it's definitely not that way now. And to your point,
Mhm.
it's definitely more responsibility and
Yeah.
larger responsibility too.
Yeah, it's always been that way. That it was never not that way. The further you go up the rungs of the ladder, just the more responsibility you have, and quite frankly, the more weight you will have, the more important it is that you become the thermostat and not the thermometer in the
Mm-hmm.
room, because now everybody looks to how you're going to react to a certain situation. Imagine being in some of the leadership roles in corporate America right now, as we record this in May, middle of May 2026. the just the vast amount of change that we know that we are staring down the barrel of, and we don't really know, we have no idea what's coming. The only thing that we know is that some change is coming, and I
Yeah.
see some that are in denial, specifically around AI entering their workspace, and then I see some that are embracing it. I saw one company yesterday that was just, had posted on LinkedIn where it was a software company that serves the ag space, provides the software that's kind of one of the backbones of the ag retail space, and they were in an AI incubator, for the day with their team, just learning and like ideating around how we can use technology to disrupt ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we're working on here at the Momentum Company with Jericho. It's a disruptive product that acts as an activation layer to companies' CRMs, but then also does the teaching and training on products and sales and things along the way in ways that as a sales trainer, I never could. Because I recognize, like, as a sales trainer, as a coach, I'm about to get disrupted. I can go get really good coaching right now from Claude, right? Or from ChatGPT. If I give it my stuff and tell it enough about me, it can do a pretty good job. It doesn't replace the human interface, right?
Mm-hmm.
The human intelligence layer. Like, I'm always going to want to be in front of a human, but there's a lot of just the day-to-day processes and things like this that we do. Anything that you do on repeat, anything you do more than once can be taught now to an AI
Yeah.
and basically automated. Nobody should ever have to touch it again. I don't know why we would. Right, it's like over the years, one of the more frustrating points in running a business in ag has been trying to get specifically ag retailers to stop sending checks.
Yeah.
It's 2026, like, it's wild. Like, I shouldn't have to get a check just because it's over a
Yeah.
certain amount
Direct
of money.
deposit.
But here's the thing: somebody loses their job if there's not a check to send.
That's true.
There's nowhere else for that person to go inside that company, because all the other, that there historically has been a job, somebody in accounts payable, that's their job, is to write a check,
Yeah.
but I'm talking to retailers every day, and they're not eliminating jobs. Nobody's eliminating jobs right now, but as people retire, as changes are made, they're not backfilling those jobs.
Yeah.
So it's not going to look like we wake up one day and all the jobs are gone. That's not what it's going to be like. We're going to wake up 10 years from now and we're going to look back and say, holy crap, do you remember back in 2026 when people still used to write checks? Like, you know,
Like,
that's what it's going to look like. Anyway, back to my point, which is, imagine you're the leader now leading these companies, large companies like Bayer, Corteva, etc., smaller companies like some startups in the biological space, but everybody is being affected by what's going on in the market. You have waited your whole career to be in a position, because working your way up the rungs of the ladder, learning the leadership stuff that you're talking about, Jackie.
mm-hmm.
And now you're like, the most disruptive technology to ever enter humanity just landed on my doorstep. As a leader, what do I do with it?
Yeah. Don't panic. Number one, don't panic. And again, like, I'm not against AI. I use AI in my, daily, in my work life. It is definitely a tool. And if you're not leveraging it or educating yourself about it, you're definitely going to be left behind. So, it's just one of those things. It's a revolution that we're going through, and, strap in. But yeah, I would say, I'm going through that with some people I'm coaching now. Like, sustainability is a really good example of that. And, not being political one way or another, but there were some drastic changes with, different administrations that have come in the past couple of years. And they're like, well, what are we doing? What does my function look like? And so if you think about that, what I've coached people on is, think about your values and think about your team's values and what's important. And it goes back to that vulnerability piece. Like, I know these leaders are being looked toward having all the answers, but the reality is they don't. And it's okay to be candid and transparent and say, I don't know, but we're going to work through this together. So, what I do know, and this is, the state of the union right now, and just be very, very transparent. And this is what we're working on. Here are some of the gaps, but this is how we plan on moving forward. I would challenge, because one question that I had, I moderated a panel of HR leaders at the Women in Agribusiness Summit last year, Orlando, and we were talking about changes in AI. And one thing that I had asked them was, to your point, with AI coming in and how it can, people have patterns, and essentially it learns a pattern and then it just starts executing on it. And so, how are organizations focusing on their people to upskill them, whether it's in AI or a specific other skill or task, in order for them to pivot their focus? Because
Mm-hmm.
transferable, whether you're in a function, they're transferable across organizations. So that's always my question back, is how are you as an individual leader really upskilling your organization and empowering them with the tools, whether it's AI, or educating them on another skill set in order for them to pivot?
Mm.
So I think that's a really good question for people to ask themselves as well, aside
Yep.
from the values and what do we know, is what can we be doing to upskill them in this certain situation?
I like the direction you're going. Okay. I wanna play with this just for a minute. Okay. Whose
Okay.
responsibility is it to do the upskilling at this point?
Well, I think, if nobody does it, then if you're just constantly passing the buck, like, somebody has to
Yeah.
stand up and take the lead on that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that's another thing. People have been, with all the disruptions, whether from AI or just the industry as a whole, we're going through a
Mm-hmm.
flux right now. I think people are scared to kind of stick their hand up and, want to stay low and play it safe. But if you're just going through
Mm-hmm.
the motions, it's like we talked about. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So if you're not going to be that leader and stand up and take it on, again, it doesn't have to be right, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you're never going to move forward. You're never going to move yourself forward, your people forward, an organization forward. And that kind of goes back to culture as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you willing to tolerate? How many
Right.
organizations have you been to, Mark, and they've all got the motivational posters on the wall,
Right.
and what their organization stands for. And then, but if you were to ask that leader, when in the last 30 days did you make a decision based on what that poster says? What do you think their answer is going to be? Probably no, or
Yeah.
I don't even know what that poster says anymore, or
What does it actually say?
yeah. So I think it's a lot of, are you content with just sitting there and, trying to, ride out the storm, or are you willing to step up and maybe do something a little bit different, do something uncomfortable, which again doesn't mean that it's wrong, and try to make a change.
Yeah. The nature of my question is sort of this, like I sit on the, since we're talking a little bit around generations today, right? I sit right on the fence between the Gen X and the millennial generation. In fact, the very first program that I started my business with back in 2013 was called Managing Across Generations. Okay. And I was paid by the Corteva. Back then it was Dow AgroSciences. Okay. It's like somehow that seems like I'm dating myself. Back when it was Dow AgroSciences, but it used to be, and it was something else before that. But anyway, when it was Dow AgroSciences, John Demerly wrote me a check and sent me across the state of North Dakota and Montana one winter to go teach retailers how to manage better across generations. Right. So this is something I know something about. So it's what helped get my business going way back in the beginning. It was one of my first deals. And in the process of doing that, one of the things that I discovered was the actual need for coaching for the up and coming generation. At that time, it was the millennials. Millennials were the scariest thing in the world, by the way, 13 years ago to corporate America. It was the scariest thing ever. Now we have like two more generations on top of that we talk
Mhm.
about, and another one coming up behind that. And now the millennials have something to bitch about, right?
Yeah.
They have a whole like, oh my gosh, these guys are. And so like with every generation, apparently, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And so that's kind of I stopped doing that training. Because I'm like, oh my gosh, we just keep blaming it on the next generation. At what point do you just take kind of pull up your bootstraps and own the situation? But anyway,
Mhm.
one of the things I wanted to get into with you, at least topically today, is it was around like, so why, like, whose responsibility is it at this point? If I'm a if I'm a proactive Gen Xer or Boomer still in the workforce, I have an
Mhm.
opportunity to see what needs to be done. But here's the thing: we have a son-in-law entering the family, or about to be son-in-law here in the next 8 or 9 months, and he's 26 and he's fantastic. And I am constantly texting him for like, hey, I need to do this thing with this database. How do you do it? Okay, he's
Yeah.
so native. He's so native. He just like his because I forget 20 years ago, my brain was more plastic than it
Mhm.
is now. It was more pliable. It could adapt and adjust and change to things better or differently. Um, and I think this is an area where, from a leadership standpoint, if you're in that Gen X, if you're in that Boomer category, and you're still in the workforce, then you need to be thinking about like, how do I leverage those young people coming in to help us as a company, as a team, disrupt the work that we do? How do we do it better? How do we do it differently? I don't care if you're an independent ag retailer listening to this. How can you logistics better using AI? Nobody on your team has figured that out yet. You better figure it out, because someone's going to figure it out and run over you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and I think like I think historically it's always been, well, you need to earn your stripes. And, because I remember, coming out of college, bright eyed, bushy tail, and wanting to, just tackle the world. And there was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times, like, when I always wanted to live overseas and work overseas. Like, I've said that since I was 23 and in grad school. And I remember talking to people about that at the different organizations. And it was like, well, you just have to wait. You just have to wait. And I would say, why? And I could never get a straight answer. And it maybe it was, oh, you need more experience. Okay, experience in what? Like, can you tell me something specific? And it was just kind of like, you have to sit and wait your turn until like you're called on. And where now I think with younger generations, because the industry, like, everything's changing and moving quite quickly, and they're just, like you said, they're able to adapt so much quicker. I definitely think it's an opportunity for organizations to, pull up that younger generation and ask them, what would you do in this situation? Like, not just, again, if I can bring it back to the behavioral piece, when I work through that, of because I talk about different postures with people. And so it's either, do you partner, do you abstain, do you challenge, are you direct? And so direct specifically means, do it this way and this is how I want it done, which can be great in certain instances. But in others, if my clients come up really high and direct, I'll ask, well, where is that stifling creativity and innovation with your direct reports or even further down the chain? And then, there's usually a long pause and they're like, well, I never thought about that. And I'm like, why are you telling them to do it this way? Well, we've always done it that way. It's like, okay, stop and think about that. So just, yeah, to your point of, I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the up and coming generations, because they're just learning different, they're learning about things and different things than what we did in school. And it's going to be the same thing, after this AI and, the dust settles from that, which I don't know if it ever will. But I mean, it's just constantly going to be evolving and having that change. So I think if people are open to having those different conversations and what does this actually look like and how do we build, I definitely think then the sky is the limit.
Yep. It's so true. I think this is such an important, really imperative conversation for leaders to be having amongst themselves right now, is how do we manage and leverage and invest in our talent more importantly than ever, right?
Hmm.
Like we developed a whole tool around it. We can go into any team right now and create an entire strategic learning design in a couple hours using AI. We can understand exactly who needs what training. You couldn't do that before. That you needed a chief learning officer and a lot of time, and even then it wasn't that good, right? And now we can do it. I can do a whole team by lunch,
Yeah, it's
and
absolutely
it's
incredible. Like the
wild.
things that you can achieve. and how much faster we can go because of
Mm-hmm.
AI.
And detailed and specific, and we can really, like, I can get to know Jackie and like how to help her grow into the person who can serve this organization the best. And because I can, I should, because I think you have a moral obligation as a leader to curate an environment within which your person, your people, absolutely can thrive. That's the mission of our company, actually, is to help leaders and organizations create or curate environments within which their people can thrive. Because you should. That's your purpose. But we also understand that we're also all caught in the tension between all the things we'd like to do and the stuff that actually is going to get people paid on Friday. So we have to somehow walk in that tension. And believe me, I do it every single day. And we're just a little 4-person company with a few contractors on top of that, right? But it's like, hey, every other week we still got to get people paid, right? Including ourselves. And we got to find a way to make that happen. And there's a whole list of stuff that we want to do, and it all costs money and it takes time, and you have to walk that balance. And that's why it comes back to being the thermostat and not the thermometer, given the situation. And you talked a little bit, I would just want to bring it back into this as we bring it in for landing. You talked about, dreaming of getting to go work in Europe and knowing that you wanted to do that. By the way, today, like, if you're young and you're willing to move somewhere in the world, that makes you a hot commodity. First of
Yeah.
all, like, most young people don't want to move. Companies are always frustrated in trying to get people to relocate. So if you're willing to do that, huge strategic advantage for you. Just put that little thought in the back of your mind. But there's an opportunity to come and work with you or hang out with you this summer, I believe, in July. You've got a
Yeah.
leadership event going on. Talk about it.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm hosting a leadership summit in Italy. So it's all about food and agriculture. So it's dedicated
Mm-hmm.
specifically to the industry. And it is for those senior leaders, that high caliber. And I'm really excited. It's July 13th through the 17th. So beautiful time to be in Italy. We'll be meeting with producers who have direct impact on the global food value chain. So
Mm-hmm.
like, this isn't just mom and pop farmers, which nothing against them. Like, these are people who are they're dealing with global exports, and what does this look like, and from a marketing perspective, and customer and consumer trends. So really excited about that. My keynote speaker is actually Andrea Farinetti, and so his family was one of the founding families of Italy, Eataly, and they founded that because they realized that local farmers were needed a place to sell their produce outside of the local farmers market, and it really focused a lot on the producer and their story, as well as sustainability and regenerative agriculture. So like I said, really excited. July in Italy, it will be all about food, it will be all about leadership. We've got some really high caliber people in the cohort, and I'm excited to share more once it happens.
Beautiful. How do we go find out more about that? If I catch this in time, and it's
Yeah.
still somewhere before July
Yes.
13th of 2026, how can I uh, get on the list?
Yeah, so you can go to gendconsulting.com and you can find out more. It'll have all the information about the agenda, the objectives, deliverables, pricing, etc. You can also reach out to me directly, either at info@gendconsulting.com or through LinkedIn. I hang out a lot on LinkedIn, so you can find me there at Jacqueline Langlois. But yeah, we've still got a couple seats left. I'm limiting it to only 10 people, so it's very exclusive. And again, like I said, that high caliber senior leader. And I think people are going to get a lot out of it.
I love it. Make sure you get signed up. If you're looking for something to add on this summer, get over there and go. And I think it's actually pretty affordable. So go get signed up. All right. Jackie, thank you for being on the show. Thanks for coming on the Intentional Ag Leader, sharing some of your wisdom around leadership. And it's been a fun conversation. Thanks for being on.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Really had a great time. Thanks for the opportunity.